get finished up on time. In this section, we will review the different types of production records and how you will use them in your food service operation. Completing production records can be a team effort. This is a picture that one of our specialists took at a school. They have the production records on clipboards, and you can see they even have pins attached there so that they can complete them. They have their breakfast and lunch records color-coded on different colored paper. And this was just an easy way for these staff members to record the food items and how much they prepared and how much was left over. You can obviously come up with your own system and your own method for how it works at your school, but just one idea. And I did want to mention, when we're talking about production records in this section, that just a reminder, you will not be using the SFSP production record when school starts this year, like maybe you were over the summer or last year. You will need to be using the production records for the school meals program, even if you're operating the SSO program. So those still require the school meals production records. Next slide. All foods, including condiments, must be recorded on a daily basis. So production records are required to be completed daily. And a tip from a seasoned food service director is don't leave anything blank thinking that you'll come back and fill it in later, because likely you will not, and you will forget to do that. So they are daily production records, and so don't save them up and take them home on the weekends to complete or anything like that. We want you to complete those daily so that they're an accurate representation. We don't want you to try to have to remember and recreate what happened that day. So they demonstrate compliance with the meal pattern, and they document the amount of each food item prepared, sold, or left over. They are to be completed by each preparation kitchen. So if you have more than one site where food is prepared, each site is responsible for documenting the food prepared. Next slide. Nutrition Services is required to conduct administrative reviews of the school meals program, and production records are a really important part of this review process. They are also an important tool for you guys at the school that can be used for forecasting production. Production records must be kept on site, like I said before. Keep those at the school. They are school property and they're property of the school district, so don't take them home. And remember that no records means no reimbursement. So these records are your documentation that meal pattern has been met and that you are entitled to receive the reimbursement for those meals. If production records are missing or incomplete, then your school will not receive reimbursement for those meals. So if you've been at our trainings before, you probably know what we always say, that if it's not written down, it didn't happen. So even if we believe you that an item was served, we can't give you credit for it if you don't have the documentation that that component or those items were served. Next slide, Allie. So both schools and residential childcare institutions are required to use the lunch and breakfast production record provided by NDE. You may also develop your own, but this requires approval by NDE each year when you submit your school meals application in the CMP system. The production record forms are available on the Nutrition Services website and in the handout packet. On our website, under school meals, if you go to forms and resources, you can find those records there, and they're available as both a PDF and a Word document for your use. Next slide. These are the different types of production records that you can use. First, we have the standard breakfast and lunch production records, and these are used by the majority of our Nebraska schools, and we'll go through some examples of these coming up here. The multi-day record has many uses. It is a way to track items set out on a regular basis. Like, for example, you can use it for your fruit and vegetable bar. Some people like to use it for condiments or some breakfast items, and we'll talk more about that. And then single day production records are primarily used for specific food bars in addition to the regular line. And then delivery tickets are required for schools that get their meals from another location. So I think we've talked about having binders for labels. We've talked about having binders for recipes. It's also a good idea to have a binder for your production records. Now, you'll probably need a separate binder for breakfast and one for lunch. Just throughout the year, they kind of tend to fill up. So I think a lot of schools find it helpful to have a breakfast one and a lunch one. And then just every day file the most current production record on top. We love it when we come for a review and you can just hand us your binders that are all organized and have everything in there that we need ready to go. Okay, next slide, Allie. So this first production record handout is a sample of a master copy, and it can be found on page 26 of your handout packet. You can see that they've pre-printed some general information and those items that are available daily before making copies to help save some time and make filling these out a little bit easier. So you don't have to do that, but that's just one tip that some schools have found to make it a little bit easier. If you pre-print some stuff before you make copies, then it's just a little bit less writing or filling in information for you. On this master copy, you can see that the information pre-printed is highlighted in blue. So they have the school name on the top left-hand side there, the year over on the right, and if offer versus serve is being utilized, and for what grades. And they have left the top line blank to record their daily entree. And we can see in this example that they offer a deli sandwich and a chef salad daily, along with the fruit and vegetable bar and milk for all grades. Now, be sure that the headers listed at the top and along the side match up with the grade groups that you serve. The headers can be changed in the Word document. So if you serve the same menu portion sizes for grades K through 8, you could change that to say K through 8 instead of K through 5 and 6 through 8 if you wanted to. And you can also create a master copy like this for breakfast as well. Next slide. This is the bottom half of that daily production record where you're going to record the amount of food prepared and left over. Notice that it's divided into the 5 food components required to be offered for lunch. So as a menu planner, if you don't have something to record in one of those components, you know that something's wrong and you need to go back and double check your menu for the day. You can see in this example, they have pre-filled the 2 entree options that they offer every day. And since they have a different type of deli sandwich each day, they've left a space to record the kind of sandwich that they'll be having. And in this example, the 2 entrees are prepared using a school recipe, which can be abbreviated SR in that second column. And if a fruit and vegetable bar is offered, you can indicate that here and show that these items are recorded on the multi-day form, which is abbreviated MDF here. And we'll talk more about the multi-day form and how to record that on some upcoming slides. And then finally, record the kind of milk that you offer each day. The fat content of the milk choices offered, such as skim chocolate and 1% white, must also be recorded. And for this coming school year, the actual daily milk usage on the breakfast and lunch production records will be required to be documented, and I'll explain a little bit more about that coming up on the next slides as well. Next. This is an example of a completed production record, the top portion of it. So let's go through this example of a daily production record and talk about what you need to record on a daily basis. This top half is the plan, and that can be done in advance. So it's your plan of what you're going to have for the day, the menu. And if you already have the information filled in from the master copy that we talked about in the previous slides, then the first step would be to record the planned number of student and adult lunches in the top left-hand corner. So you can see they have 260 student lunches and 20 adult lunches. The second step is to record the menu for the day. Make sure that you record all entree items if you have more than one entree choice. So on this day, the students can choose from the grilled chicken sandwich on a bun or a chef salad. The other items, the green beans, the French fries, the watermelon or grapes, and the oatmeal cookie and milk are also all part of the menu for the day. So they've recorded their whole menu for the day in this portion. And it's important to record all of the items to show that you have met meal pattern requirements. The third step then is to record the planned number of portions with the serving size by each grade group. And then on the right, over to the right, you can see that they've also recorded the vegetable subgroups as O for other and S for starchy. And they have recorded the grain requirement for the day and the week, as well as the meat alternate requirement for the day and the week for each grade group. So we can see how much meat and how much grain they're offering and where they are at for the week for meeting the daily and weekly minimum requirements there. Next slide. So this is the completed bottom half of the production record. And the bottom half is where the total quantities of food prepared, sold, and left over are recorded. In the first column on the left is where you'll want to record the food items used. The second column is where you indicate if a school recipe has been used, or record the product brand and number, or indicated if it is the product is a commodity item. Now here I want to point out that when it says product brand, be sure to record the actual brand and not the distributor. So Cashway Distributing, US Foods, Cisco, those are your distributor, not the product brand. Those distributors or vendors can have several different brands of, say, a chicken nugget, and we need to know which brand of chicken nugget it is because that they may credit differently towards the meal pattern. So here you can see brands listed like Tyson, Sara Lee, Generation 7, Highland. Those are all the product brand names. The third column is where you'll record the total amount of food prepared by recording the number of servings or pounds. In this column, one thing to avoid is you want to avoid documenting things like cases and bags, unless you're going to record the case count, the weight, or the number of servings in the case or bag. These types of things, they vary by brand, and as a reviewer looking at your records, I don't know the amounts in the case or bag. We don't have those memorized for each brand, so we do need that information on the production record. And in the fourth column, record the number of seconds or a la carte sold. And then in the fifth column, that's where you'll record the amount left over. Now you'll want to use the same units to record the amount prepared and the amount left over so that those numbers make sense. Let's look at this example starting with the meat alternate component section. They have listed the grilled chicken, and you can see it's a Tyson product, so they've listed the product brand name, and they have prepared 275 that are each 2-ounce portions. Make sure to record you know, a unit and how large each of those are. So either how many ounces each one or the total number of pounds prepared. And they sold 15 seconds and there were 5 left over. The chef's salad was a school recipe and they prepared 10 of those for grades K through 8 and 10 for grades 9 through 12. You can see none were sold and the number left over is recorded in the last column over there. The next component is the grains component, and in this section, indicate if the item is whole grain rich with the WG-R abbreviation. And for this school year, remember that all the items recorded in this section should be whole grain rich if you are crediting those towards the meal pattern. And it's also helpful to see how the item credits on the production record. So is it 1 grain serving or is it 2 grain servings? And in this example, we have a whole grain rich bun for the chicken sandwich. It is a Sara Lee product, and they have prepared 275, and they're each 2-ounce buns. None were sold and 20 were left over. In the grains component, they also had a whole grain rich oatmeal cookie. A school recipe was used and they prepared 280 1-ounce cookies, and 20 were sold and 15 were left over. And fruits offered for the day were the watermelon and grapes. For fresh produce, you don't have to record a brand necessarily like we talked about, but and you can see the amount prepared and left over was recorded in pounds, which would be appropriate for recording fruits and vegetables. Vegetables prepared were the green beans and French fries. And notice the amounts prepared and left over were recorded in the same unit, which is important to determine the amount used. Also notice for the green beans that they specified that they used 5 number 10 cans. They didn't just say 5 cans. If you write, you know, just 5 cans, we don't necessarily know what size that is, even though we know, you know, most of you use number 10 cans, but we also have a lot of small schools. I think on our last training, we had a school that only had 5 students, so maybe they're not using a number 10 can. So it's good to be specific there. And for the French fries, they recorded the total number of pounds. And like I said, a common mistake we see here is people will record, you know, 5 bags of French fries or 10 bags, but we don't know how big those bags are. And so just saying 5 bags doesn't give us the information we need to make sure that you had enough prepared and that meal pattern has been met. And finally, don't forget to record the milk. As you will notice here, they've recorded the actual number of milks. And USDA is now requiring that schools use an actual daily milk count rather than a milk recipe. So no milk recipes for this school year. So starting this school year, you are required to record the daily milk usage by milk type. So you can see you need to record either skim flavored, and then if you have skim or 1% white. And you will do this for the breakfast and lunch production records. So separate usage recorded for each breakfast and lunch. Record your usage for breakfast and lunch production records. And then other is where condiments are recorded or other items that were served. Condiments can also be recorded on the multi-day form, but you do have to record them somewhere and the amount used needs to be documented. They're not part of the meal pattern per se, but they do contribute to those dietary specifications of sodium, calories, and fat. So they need to be documented to show that you're meeting those dietary specifications. This is an example of a completed top portion for a breakfast production record. So once again, just remember you can change those headers, especially at breakfast if you're serving, the same menu. For example, this is a K through 8 school, so they've changed that for K through 8 and 9 through 12. And starting with the menu, we can see that 2 entree options are offered. Students can select from pancakes and sausage, or they can have cereal and toast. Now, if students are allowed to select both items, you could just list them or you could use an and like they have for the fruit choices below. So they have said assorted juice and fruit, which indicates that the students can select both the juice and the fruit. And remember to record the cooking temperature and time for those items that are time and temperature controlled. Next slide. This is the bottom portion of the breakfast production record that's been completed. And just like for lunch, you have the columns to record the food items used, the product information or recipe, and the total amount prepared, the number sold, and the amount left over. Now notice that they have listed the different kinds of juice, cereal, and milk in this section. You do need to list the kinds of juice. You do not have to count juice by type, but we do want to know the types that were offered at least. And then you must, for cereal, you can either list the types of cereal, or if you say assorted cereals, then just know that you must have documentation on file and send in documentation for all cereals served during an administrative review. However, if you are following the CACFP meal pattern for the preschoolers, the PreK CACFP meal pattern, then you must list the types of cereal, as that meal pattern has certain restrictions on the amount of sugar that can be in the cereal. So we need to make sure that those are the correct cereals. And once again, for this school year, just a reminder that you are required to record the daily milk usage by milk type, so the skim flavored and either skim or 1% white. And milk should be recorded once again on both the breakfast and the lunch production records separately. Some schools do use the multi-day form to track things like cereal and juice, and that is also acceptable if you choose to do that. Next slide. When you're recording portion sizes, remember to be specific on entree portion sizes. So be specific on how they're portioned out. In this example of spaghetti with meat sauce, recording 1.5 or 2 ounces probably isn't the correct way to record this. Maybe what they're showing here is that it credits for 1.5 or 2 ounces of meat alternate, but that's not how it's served. So if the spaghetti and meat sauce are combined and served together, you could record the portion size from your recipe, such as shown by the 3/4 cup for K through 8 and 1 cup through 9 through 12. Or if the spaghetti and meat sauce are served separately, you could record the amount of spaghetti and the amount of meat sauce, those amounts separately. The best practice, of course, on these is to have a standardized recipe like Donna talked about with the correct portion sizes per grade group and how they credit on the recipe. Certain entrees are made up of multiple portion sizes, and they may vary depending on the grade group served. So another reason to have that recipe and those portion sizes. And just another thing to note here, when recording portion sizes for fruits and vegetables, you should record that portion size in cups. So, you know, that you're offering a half a cup or 1 cup of fruit versus saying like 4 ounces of fruit or 8 ounces. Next slide. This is an example of how you could record self-serve items. So on the production record for self-serve items, you can record SS for self-serve rather than a portion size. This is an example of a school where the elementary grades are served everything. So they've listed portion sizes for the K through 8, but the secondary students, 9 through 12, serve themselves. So they've listed SS, they serve themselves the romaine salad, the assorted relishes, and the peaches. And that's how you can show that on a production record, and we will know what that means. Next slide. This is a single day food bar form, and this is an optional form. You don't have to use it, but let's say you're planning a potato bar day and you will have a lot of toppings for students to select from. You could use this form instead of the daily production record. You know, maybe you can't fit all of the toppings underneath that component on the daily production record. So you could write them on here instead to show the items that were set out, how much was set out, and what was left over. You could then staple it to your daily production record, as you'll have other items that you'll want to record for that day. Other examples of when you might want to use this would maybe be for a sandwich bar day or a nacho bar day, any of those days where you're allowing them to make their own sandwich or make their own entree with lots of different toppings. If this is something that you do on a regular basis, you could pre-print those items that are served or set out on a regular basis to make it a little bit easier. And then be sure to write in recipe sources and record the unit of measure for these foods. Just one difference to point out here between this form and the regular production record is there are no portion sizes listed here because these items are all self-serve. So be specific when recording the amount prepared and left over. Up next, we're going to talk about recording food items on self-serve fruit and vegetable bars and condiments. This handout is in your packet, and it is an example of a multi-day form for a fruit and vegetable bar or for breakfast. Once again, you can pre-print those items that are set out on a regular basis. And the food placed on the bar will be tracked over the course of the week. So as food items are added during the week, you'll record the amount that is added and then record the leftovers at the end of the week. And from that, you can then record the total usage for the week. Be specific in the description of the food items on the bar. So you can see here they have listed romaine/iceberg lettuce mix, which describes the type of the lettuce. And there's also a place to record the product information, the vegetable subgroup, the unit of weight or volume, or the number of servings. And we can see in this example that the romaine iceberg lettuce mix is a Dole brand, and it counts towards the dark green vegetable subgroup. It's being tracked in pounds. And here's another example of where not to say things like 5 bags. We don't know how much is in that bag. So we either, you know, how many servings or how many pounds each bag are if you write 5 bags. And on Monday, we can see that they put out 10 pounds of lettuce. Tuesday, they put out 7 pounds. Wednesday, they put out 7 pounds. Thursday, they put out 8 pounds. And Friday, they put out 5 pounds. So at the end of the week, they had 1 pound left over. And then they could calculate the amount used for the week by taking the 37 pounds they put out minus the 1 pound left over to equal the 36 pounds used for the week. I'll let you read through the rest of those examples on your own when you have time. I won't go through all of those, so we'll move on to the condiment bar. For the condiment bar, condiments, while not food components, must be recorded. They still contribute to the nutrients, the calories, sodium, fat, that the meal contains. So remember, you not only need to meet those meal pattern requirements, but you also have to meet those nutrient standards. So yes, you need to record condiments. You can either do that on the regular production record or on the multi-day form like this. As we've been saying, you can pre-print those items that are set out on a regular basis. And you can track these items by the same process that we discussed on the multi-day form for the fruit and vegetable bar. The product description, once again, is important. For example, the ranch dressing, is it regular? Is it reduced calorie? Is it fat-free or a 50-50 mix? That all makes a difference for those dietary specifications. So condiments are important to be tracked, and there's a couple different ways you can do that, but just make sure that you are documenting those. Next slide. And finally, the last example we have here is a delivery ticket that is used when the food is sent to another location. A delivery ticket is sent along with the order. It is a way to document meal pattern requirements and serving sizes to the site that will be serving the food, and a document of the time and temperature control for the foods that are potentially hazardous. So on the left-hand side, the ticket records the number of meals sent, the menu, and the portion sizes to be served. And the staff on site must then record the temperature of any potentially hazardous foods and the time in the far left column. And then on the right-hand side, staff at that location are to record the condiments used for that day, any extra food items that were set along with the actual number of milks at the site. So no milk recipes here either. So remember, no milk recipes on your breakfast, lunch, or delivery tickets. Those all need to be actual milk counts, actual types of milk used for the day and for each meal. Next slide. This is the meal pattern check form, and this is a resource that can be used to help you plan menus. A copy of a completed meal pattern check form is available in your handout. And this is a great resource for new managers. You may want to complete this form until you feel comfortable with the meal pattern requirements, or maybe you always wanted to complete it as a double check. I personally like to use it. And we do use it when we are conducting administrative reviews to ensure that meal pattern has been met. It is available online as a spreadsheet as well. So yeah, just a really great tool to make sure that you have all the components in there, that you're meeting all those vegetable subgroups, that you have your 2 different types of milk, and that you're meeting those minimum daily requirements and the weekly requirements for grains and meat alternate as well. And last thing to talk about here is record retention. I think we had some questions about that right at the beginning. But for production records, those are 3 years plus the current. And as Beth talked about, for those HACCP records, those are 1 year plus the current year. And that is unless your school district has a policy to keep those records longer. So if your school has a different rule that is longer than these requirements, then you need to follow that. And that is all I have for production records. So up next, I'm going to turn it over to Donna to talk about the after school care snack program and the CACFP pre-K meal pattern.
Thank you, Erica, and thanks for that great overview of production records, because that's a really important part of that documentation that we talked about earlier. Okay, let's talk briefly about the after school care snack program. This pertains to some of you. Not every school has one of these programs, but we wanted to discuss it just for a little bit. This program must include an educational or enrichment activity. And as far as what the menu should offer, it must offer one serving from 2 different meal components. The meal components are the same as they are for the school lunch and breakfast programs. Juice cannot be served if milk is the only other component. So you can't serve a milk and juice combo to meet the requirements of this program. Okay, next slide, please. Production records and meal count sheets. We do have those on our after school snack program page that you can pull off if you need to. They must be completed daily. There is no offer versus serve in the after school snack program. It's the 2 components and the student must take both of them. They must take both components and the required portion size for the snack to be claimed. And I do want to mention one thing that trips people up with the after school snack program is the size of the fruit and vegetable portion, which is 3/4 cup. And I think everyone's so used to the 1/2 cup requirement of fruit and vegetable for the school lunch and breakfast programs that they do not realize that for this program, it is 3/4 cup. There are 2 on-site reviews required annually, one within the first 4 weeks of the program operation, and the other is at any time. So as I said, the record keeping requirement, documentation, meal pattern, production records, meal count forms, you can find those on our after school snack webpage. Okay, next slide, we talk a little bit about special milk program, and this is a program that, again, not all of you will be operating or are operating. It's a program available for half-day preschoolers or schools that do not have access to meals. And so it's for students who do not have access to a meal and do not participate in the school breakfast or lunch program. For this program, you can offer 1% or skim unflavored milk only, and there are 2 ways to claim for this program, claim reimbursement. You can either charge all households and claim as paid, or use the eligibility documentation you would normally have on file and claim as paid and free. And on the next slide, if you're thinking about who pays for the milk, you must charge all households or determine who will pay for the milk. And some schools do this. They must use a non-program funding source. And as far as how much do you charge for the milk, you must know your dairy price when you're putting in a claim for reimbursement, you definitely need to have your dairy price available, what it is that you are being charged for the milk, not what you charge for extra milk in the school lunch or breakfast program. Okay, so next up is the preschool meal pattern. And we have a few slides on the preschool meal pattern here, and this has been around for a few years, but I know it still can be a bit confusing. If we look at the next slide, we remember that, USDA meal patterns, as far as the age of the child we're talking about here, we will be talking about the National School Lunch Program, where portions are based on a child's grade, such as grades K through 5, which would include some of the preschoolers in their age-wise. There's also the Child and Adult Food Care Program, that can be, this meal pattern can also be used, and we'll talk about this specifically because portions are based on a child's age, and we're talking about the age group from 3 to 5. In your handout packet, you have a handout, several pages in length actually, that deals with the Child and Adult Care Food Program, CACFP, meal pattern for preschoolers. So if you follow this meal pattern, you're probably familiar with it. It's a little bit different than the K through 5 NSLP pattern. So which meal pattern do you use for your preschoolers that you're providing meals for? Well, it depends on where and when the children eat. The school breakfast and school lunch meal patterns can be followed when preschoolers are served in the cafeteria at the same time as other students. This is called commingling. Another one of those terms that you can use and throw around a little bit. But basically, if they're commingling, if they're eating with other students, if they're next to other students at the same time in the cafeteria, you can use the K through 5 school lunch and breakfast meal patterns. The CACFP meal pattern must be followed when preschool meals are served in the classroom, which is what a lot of schools do. They eat in their classroom with the teachers, or if preschoolers are not commingled with other students in the cafeteria. There are situations where preschoolers may come in at a different time than the other students, and therefore they are not commingling with other students, or they could be separated physically by a good distance, and then that would consider to be not commingled. If meals are claimed through CACFP, the child care meal pattern must be followed. So let's talk a little bit about the CACFP meal pattern, because again, if you have preschool students eating in the classroom, this is the meal pattern you should be following. We have the same required components as the school lunch program, the 5 components. A breakfast, there are 3 required components. If you remember, it's grain and fruit and milk that are required. And lunch, we have the 5 required components. We have vegetables and grain, vegetables, now I can't remember what I said. And well, whatever it is, we add that to that too. But it's getting late in the day, isn't it? Okay, next slide shows the meal pattern. This is the first page of your handout in your handout packet. And again, it is divided into ages, and you would be following ages 3 through 5 in this meal pattern. Talking specifically about some of the components, we first have milk on the next slide. And for children 2 to 5 years of age, you can serve them unflavored 1% or skim milk only. Flavored milk cannot be served to children under 5 and under, and you're following the CACFP meal pattern. But under both meal patterns, water must be offered at all meals. And there's an important point to make here. You should not start the meal service by asking, do you want water or milk? Because milk has to be made available, as does water, but water cannot be served in place of milk. It may be offered alongside milk with the meals. Next slide shows meat alternate options. There are more specific guidelines for things like yogurt that can be served in CACFP, and tofu can be served also, but yogurt has a sugar requirement, a maximum sugar requirement, or not maximum, I should say maximum level of sugar that is allowed. It must contain no more than 15 grams of sugar per 4-ounce serving, which equals 1/2 cup, which equals 1 ounce of meat alternate in the meal pattern. Overall, and we do have I think a couple of pages of this handout talks about yogurt and gives you some guidelines on what types of yogurt can be served. But overall, the meat alternate quantities credit the same as school lunch in the CACFP pattern. The next slide talks about fruit and vegetables, and they are separate meal components. Typically, we see 1/2 cup servings of each. However, you can serve 1 cup of vegetable. That it must be 2 different vegetables. It cannot be, for example, mashed potatoes and French fries in the same meal. And if you do that, you do not have to serve fruit. But this applies only to CACFP and not the school lunch program. Juice is limited to once per day per child. So that means that if a child eats 2 meals at the school and gets juice at breakfast, they cannot be offered juice at the noon meal. The next slide talks about grains. And again, CACFP is different from the NSLP meal pattern because at least 1 serving of grain per day must be whole grain rich. And as Erica mentioned earlier, when filling out production records and the CACFP preschool cereal issue, breakfast cereals must contain no more than 6 grams of sugar per dry ounce. And again, we have 3 pages, I believe, in your handout packet that are devoted to whole grain rich items and the cereal and the sugar issue. There are cereals listed on this handout that give you an idea of what types of cereals you can serve with this meal pattern. Grain-based desserts, not creditable in CACFP with exceptions. Muffins, quick breads, graham crackers, and animal crackers. And desserts may be served occasionally. So the next slide, what if you are serving snacks? Snacks served during the school day cannot be claimed for reimbursement, but for licensed preschools that serve a mid-morning or mid-afternoon snack, the CACFP meal pattern must be followed. So there is no snack program in NSLP. It's basically the after-school snack program, and these kiddos are not yet in school, so they do not qualify for snack in NSLP. And basically, if a snack is provided, it must be claimed through CACFP if they are served mid-morning or afternoon snack. So other program considerations, going on to the next page. Record keeping. It's just like any other USDA program. Production records and label information must be on file to document compliance. Food production, one thing that is worth mentioning is frying is not allowed, although I don't know of many food service operations that fry. Offer versus serve is not an option when utilizing the CACFP meal pattern because it's determined that children of this age are not ready for offer versus serve. They need to experience different foods and have them placed on their plate. But the serving option that's very interesting and important to mention here is the family style meal service. And on the next slide, we talk about how that is promoted. And I've seen some really great programs with family style meal service. This happens in the classroom with the CACFP meal pattern with adult supervision. Children are seated at tables. Sometimes it's long tables shaped in a U, or round tables work really well. They serve themselves. The food is offered in bowls that they can pass around the table. Now, I'm not sure that's going to be taking place this year with the issue of the pandemic, but this is how it would take place in a normal service year. And each food component must be available so that each child can select the minimum required portion. So you have to have enough of each food component for that to happen. They can even pour their own milk. One thing that's interesting, that as long as each food component is offered to a child more than once, they may decline all foods and the meal may still be claimed as long as, again, the components are offered more than once and they decline, because, you know, this is the picky part, one of the picky ages that that kids go through when they're experiencing their eating habits. All right, so that's the end of the preschoolers meal pattern. And next up, I believe, is Allie. Is that correct?
Yes, Donna, thank you.
Okay, there you go with other important topics.
Okay, we're going to move in. This is the last part of our presentation today. So we have some important topics we're going to cover. Some of these topics include civil rights, special diets, the wellness policy, smart snacks. We'll review professional standards, non-program foods, paid lunch equity, the charge policy. We'll touch on procurement purchasing, and of course, Nebraska Farm to School. So let's get started with civil rights. The USDA non-discrimination statement must be included in your program information. The full statement must be included in the student handbook at the end of the section that addresses the lunch program. On menus, it can be a single sentence: USDA is an equal opportunity provider. Schools and residential child care institutions are required to provide annual training to food service staff on civil rights. The documentation of this training must be kept on file. Training resources are available on our webpage, just shown here on the next slide. So be sure to check those out so you can utilize them for your required annual civil rights training. Also, the "And Justice for All" poster must be displayed in a prominent location for all to view in each cafeteria. Other possible locations to hang the poster would include an office where free and reduced determinations are made, entrance to the facility, or a central kitchen where food is prepared. Be sure the poster is the 11:17 format, and make sure it is the most up-to-date version we have pictured here on the screen. Posters may be obtained from NDE Nutrition Services. Fill out and submit the material order form to receive a poster. We can go ahead and put that link in the chat for you guys again. So let's move on to special diets. Americans with Disabilities Act made important changes to the meaning and interpretation of the term disability. The definition was expanded to include anything that affects a major life activity. These changes have made it easier for individuals to establish a disability. Most physical and mental impairments constitute a disability. It is important the food service staff is aware of the procedures for handling dietary requests. Food service must work with the households to best meet the nutritional needs of the student. Households must be informed of the process and procedure for requesting student meal accommodation requests. So let's take a look at these. So for accommodations within the meal pattern requirements, a request form completed by parents is acceptable and no medical statement is required. For accommodations outside of the meal pattern requirements, a request form needs to be completed by the parent along with a medical note signed by a licensed healthcare provider. When we're talking about lifestyle choices, consider offering menu options to accommodate. If you're utilizing offer versus serve, students can make those choices. It is not required to make any changes, though. Moving on to Nebraska's competitive food policy. What are competitive foods? Foods sold at the school during meal times, and the nonprofit school food service account does not receive the proceeds from those sales. So in other words, these foods are sold in competition with the school meals program. This policy, and in your handouts, you can see, identifies when foods can be sold. A competitive food
Competitive food sales are prohibited from 1/2 hour before meal service until 1/2 hour after meal service. This applies to both breakfast and lunch. So let's say your school has a vending machine managed by the student council. It must be turned off during those times. Reimbursement withheld from schools is a violation of this policy. If your school does allow food or beverages to be sold during the day at times other than meal times, Smart Snack regulations specify which foods or beverages can be sold during the school day on the campus. The school day is defined as midnight the night before until 30 minutes after the end of the school day. A school campus is defined as all property under the jurisdiction of the school that are accessible to students during the day. So let's go back to our student council vending machine. If they want it turned on 1/2 hour after breakfast and lunch so they can sell during the day, the items in this machine must meet Smart Snack standards. So how do you determine if your items meet Smart Snack? In your handouts, there's a 2-page handout with a decision chart. As you can see shown here, on the first page, it defines the standards for the snacks. And on the second page, we'll talk about the beverages. The snacks must not exceed nutrient standards and additionally meet ingredient criteria. So you can see in the first column, the nutrition standards list the calories, the sodium, total fat, saturated fat, trans fat, and sugar limits. And then in the second column, it lists the ingredient requirements. On the second page, the beverage guide goes into greater detail listing beverages allowed and maximum sizes. The chart is also broke down into grade groups. These handouts are guides to help you determine if an item can be sold. Smart Snack standards apply to all food and beverages sold on campus during the day from vending machines. Labels must be on file for all Smart Snack items. Smart Snack standards do not apply to food and beverages sold during weekend or evening events, nor do they apply to items given away. So in addition to the handouts, you can utilize the Smart Snack calculator on the Alliance for a Healthier Generation website. The calculator will ask you for some information on the product and then tell you if it meets Smart Snack standards. So by using these two tools, the handout or the calculator, you can offer compliant Smart Snacks that can be sold during the school day at your establishment. Up next is school wellness policy, and I'm going to pass it to Sean to wrap us up.
Thank you, Allie. Well, we are on the downhill side of today's presentation, and I will be wrapping it up with a few more topics, and then we'll have a little bit of time to answer some of your questions. So let's talk about school wellness policies. Every SFA is required to have a school wellness policy and a school wellness committee that meets throughout the school year to assess and report progress in meeting the goals that have been established by the wellness committee. The goals must be included in the policy, and on the slide, you can see on the Nutrition Services website under our Forms and Resources section, there is a link to wellness policies. Included in your handout packet is a great resource to take back to your school wellness committee that outlines the goals that must be addressed in your wellness policy. These goals include public involvement, nutrition guidelines, nutrition education, nutrition promotion, physical activity. There must be a component that allows for public notification of your wellness policy, And then, of course, the monitoring and evaluation of the policy. Now, I want to emphasize that this is just not a school food service wellness policy, but it is a school-wide wellness policy that addresses our students at our schools, okay? And so you may be a member of the committee, and perhaps maybe you are the person in charge of the committee, but it needs to encompass all different players at the school. So administration, teachers, anyone that would be involved in implementing the wellness components at your school. So this is a requirement. It's under the school meals program, but it is a district school-wide wellness policy. So once again, great handout in your packet that lets you do a quick assessment of your wellness policy to make sure that you are meeting all of the required components. So take that back to whoever is in charge of your wellness policy, who's ever head of your committee, and share that with them. So moving on to the next slide. The next thing I want to talk about are professional standards. USDA a number of years ago implemented professional standards for individuals that work in the school meals program. That includes hiring standards for all new food service directors based on education and experience requirements, as well as ensuring that individuals that work in the food service department maintain professional education hours. So back to the hiring standards, SFAs must hire staff that meet standards and supply documentation upon request for all new food service directors. And when we do an administrative review, and when we reach out to you as a new person on staff, we will ask you about your education and experience to ensure that your district has paid attention to those hiring standards. And so just be aware of that there are standards in place. And for our smaller districts, there is the opportunity to request a waiver that addresses if an individual that is hired doesn't meet all of the hiring standards. A plan can be put in place to ensure that they meet those requirements as they proceed with their job. So let's move on to the next slide. In your packet, you have the hiring standards as well as what the requirements are for continuing education hours. And that's also included on the slide. And as we can see below, we can see that program directors are required to have 12 hours of continuing education annually. And we also have standards for program managers. A director is the person in charge of the total food service operation. And for our SFAs that have multiple sites, there may be a manager at each site. And so that's that individual that would be managing a specific site would be required to have 10 hours of continuing education hours annually. Program staff that work more than 20 hours per week are required to have 6. And you are very lucky because you are going to get 6 hours of training hours, continuing education hours today with our presentation. And program staff that work less than 20 hours, the requirement is 4 hours. Now for our SFAs that receive their food from another school, so they have a vendor agreement. The continuing education hours are a little bit different because those folks aren't involved in food preparation. They're receiving meals. And so those hours differ a little bit. So for our vended site staff that work more than 20 hours, the requirement is 6 hours annually, and staff that work less than 20 hours per week, the requirement is 4. Training hours earned in excess of the annual requirements may be applied to the school year directly preceding or directly following the date of training. So that's a little flexibility with hours. And then all training must be documented on a training tracker log, because during an administrative review, we are required to look at these logs to ensure that staff are receiving the appropriate amount of continuing education annually. And this includes directors and managers as well as staff. So those hours need to be tracked. So the name of the training attended, the number of hours received, tracked by individual, and of course the date of the training. And in your packet today, the last page of your handout packet is your training certificate, which serves as your documentation of the hours that you are receiving today, the continuing education hours you're receiving today. That needs to be kept on file by typically the food service director to ensure that those training hours are received. So let's move on to the next slide. We're going to move on from professional education requirements to the definition of non-program foods in the school meals program. And the definition is any non-reimbursable food or beverage purchased using funds from the nonprofit food service account. So that would include, your a la carte items, your adult meals. You receive no reimbursement for a la carte items. You receive no reimbursement for adult meals. So these are considered non-reimbursable food items, food or beverage items. So it would be your milks that students purchase for sack lunches or if they want an additional milk. So any extra items. And USDA requires that the prices charged for those items must be set high enough to recover all food costs. The program cannot lose money on the sale of those items. And so in your packet, there is a form that we would ask you to complete during an administrative review that demonstrates that you are pricing those items high enough in selling price to recover your food costs. And so wanted to make sure everyone is aware of that, and that you take a look at your a la carte pricing and then adult meals. Now, adult meals, we have a handout that is not included, but it is updated on our website, and it was distributed in an email from Katie Parch. I believe that email went out yesterday, that indicates what the adult meal prices are, recommendations of what those adult meal prices should be set for school year 21-22. And how we determine what the adult meal price should be is we wait for the reimbursement from USDA for what schools would be reimbursed for the traditional reimbursement for a free lunch and a free breakfast. And then we add the value of commodities or USDA foods to that amount because you receive no allotment for USDA foods for your adult meals. So that's how that price is determined, and that has been recently released. Moving on to the next slide. The paid lunch equity tool. Now, the paid lunch equity tool is a tool that is released from USDA typically in February. It is designed for our SFAs to help determine what the paid lunch price should be for the upcoming school year. And typically all SFAs are required to complete the tool annually, and that it needs to be completed, printed, and saved and kept on file. As I mentioned just a little bit ago, it wasn't released this year till June, and I believe it wasn't released as it normally would be in February because USDA was making the determination of what's going to be happening in the upcoming school year. And so the late release of the tool gave an indication that things would be different in the upcoming school year. So SFAs planning to operate the seamless summer option during school year 21-22 do not need to follow the paid lunch equity requirements to set paid meal prices. And that is because all meals are going to be offered free of charge to students if you participate in the seamless summer option in the upcoming school year. SFAs that do not plan to participate in the seamless summer option for the upcoming school year must complete the tool and set the paid meal price according to the tool. Now, there is an exclusion if that school that is going to be operating the traditional school breakfast and lunch meal patterns, not participating in SSO, has a positive or a zero balance as of December 31st, 2021, they do not have to increase their paid lunch price. And so if you'd like more information on the paid lunch equity tool, then please visit our website. We have that as a section, a link on our website. And so that's information about the paid lunch equity tool. So be familiar with the term because I'm hopeful everything will be returning to normal operations next school year. Let's move on to the next slide. Another requirement for schools is to have a local charge policy. And this goes kind of hand in hand with the paid lunch equity tool. Schools have to have a charge policy, and this was a recent regulation that went into effect a couple of years ago. And if you are participating in the SSO program option for this upcoming school year, you still have to have a charge policy because you will be having students that purchase a la carte items. And the purpose of a charge policy is to make sure your households are aware of what your charge policy is. It's to prevent unpaid debt to the school food service account. So the charge policy has to identify what is the school's procedure for handling students' unpaid meal charges or a la carte charges. The policy must be in writing and clearly communicated to parents, administrators, and staff each school year. It should be included in the student handbook, must be included in the back to school packet. And we have a lot of resources on our website that address what needs to be included in the school meals charge policy. But just keep in mind, the purpose is to prevent debt to the food service program. We all know that it is difficult to collect on unpaid debt. And the purpose of the charge policy is to avoid that debt. Let's move on to the next slide. Next area I want to talk about is a very important topic, and it is procurement. And as I mentioned earlier in today's presentation, schools not only have an administrative review, they also have a procurement review. And if you receive federal reimbursement, you have to follow federal procurement regulations. And those regulations include procurement must be conducted in a manner that promotes full and open competition. You are receiving taxpayer dollars, and so taxpayers need to be assured that you are getting the best price for the products that you are purchasing. So being good stewards of taxpayer dollars. So let's move on to the next slide. As I mentioned, procurement reviews are a requirement. They are conducted at a minimum of once every 6 years. If you are a school that has a contract with a food service management company to operate your food service operation, the requirement is once every 3 years. And you must include in your procurement plan, every school is required to have a procurement plan or process, a code of conduct, and a specific procurement plan, and you must keep purchasing documentation on file. And there are prototypes of what a code of conduct should look like, a template included in your packet that can be adopted by your school. And there is also a template for a procurement plan for schools that can also be adopted by your school. And this specifically relates to the food service program. Moving on to the next slide. So let's just briefly talk about procurement, just a brief overview of procurement. There's informal procurement, and then there is formal procurement. And it is based upon the amount of the purchase. Okay, federal and state threshold is $250,000, but school districts may have much lower thresholds. So it's important to be knowledgeable about what your school district's threshold is. And typically for equipment, that threshold is anything above $5,000. Needs to have 3 bids and a buy is kind of a terminology we use. You need to get 3 bids for a piece of equipment over $5,000, and that needs to be documented and kept on file. And competition is considered 2 or more. Best practice is 3. And perhaps you are in an area where you may not have the opportunity, or there may not be 3 vendors in your area. For example, maybe if we're talking about purchasing procuring milk, okay, you're only going to be purchasing from one vendor. You need to at least do some comparison of pricing for milk vendors. And that can be, it can be handwritten by you based on what you have been told on the phone. It just needs to be documented. And maybe you reach out to a vendor and they say, well, we can't provide you milk. You have at least made that effort to obtain some pricing. And so that needs to be documented. Micro purchasing is purchasing under $10,000, and probably the majority of our schools, our smaller districts in Nebraska can utilize micro purchases, because what that means is you're spreading the wealth. You're not purchasing from just one vendor, you're purchasing from multiple vendors. So perhaps you purchase from Cashwa, you purchase from Cisco, you purchase from US Foods, you're spreading the wealth. And so if those purchases, one individual purchase is under $10,000, then you're spreading the wealth with purchasing from multiple vendors. Formal procurement is anything over $250,000, which requires a much more formal process. Probably not pertinent to most of our school districts in Nebraska. But there is a great handout that's included in your packet, the same one that's on your screen, that you can take and give some more review to, and certainly reach out to our office if you have any questions. So let's move on to the next slide. I want to talk very briefly about the Buy American provision. And this provision just states that if you are purchasing items, they need to be in compliance with the Buy American provision. And so with your solicitation of products, ensure that you are purchasing items that are from the United States, must keep documentation, justify the use of any exceptions. And an exception would be a product that is not produced or manufactured in the US in sufficient and reasonable enough quantities or a satisfactory quality. So bananas aren't grown in the US. And so those would be an item that would be an exception to the Buy American provision, just because we don't produce those in the US. Pineapple isn't produced in sufficient and enough quantities, and so that item would probably be an exception. But you want to make sure that you let your vendor know that you need to be in compliance with the Buy American provision. And another exception would be if competitive bids reveal the cost of the US product is significantly higher than the non-domestic product. And that might be, in the dead of winter and you need some fresh tomatoes, and purchasing those from the US would be so expensive versus purchasing those from Mexico. But you would need to keep that documentation of why that decision was made. So let's move on to the next slide. And I'm just going to really touch on farm to school. It's such a great thing that schools need to do. Is we are very much an agricultural state, and we want to promote farm to school as much as possible. Sarah Smith in our office is our lead person and super knowledgeable on farm to school. And I would ask that if you have not reached out to her and your school is interested in farm to school, you do so. And so let's move on to the next slide. Some of the programs for Farm to School that are promoted through our Farm to School efforts are Nebraska Thursdays. And Nebraska Thursdays highlight local foods on menus on Thursdays, just as the name applies. And so in the narrative that Sarah provided, she says more than 50 districts with almost 300 sites and at least 94,000 Nebraska students participate in the program. Nebraska Thursdays promotes local foods on school trays on Thursdays throughout the school year. Register for Nebraska Thursdays on the NDE website and receive access to extensive Nebraska Thursdays information, the portal with interactive recipes and free promotional items. So keep that in mind. Choose to participate and you need to register. And the next slide, we're going to talk about Harvest of the Month. And Harvest of the Month is just another great program that is connected with Farm to School. And it is promoting, I'm going to bear with me a minute. I need to switch to this slide. And it highlights local Nebraska products that can be featured on your school meals menus. It is, as you can see, the colorful poster on the slide, access to those resources and highlighting different items monthly in your school that are grown locally. So another program that there's lots of information on our website. And the Crunch Off, next slide, is coming up October 21st. Nebraska has been the champ, won the competition in 2019 and 2020, and we ask that you look at participating for this school year, and the registration is on the slide to participate. And what the Crunch Off is the opportunity to have participants all at the same time take a bite of a local food item. And we want to win for the third consecutive year. That is a fantastic honor. And we have received a lot of PR about being the winner state, and we need your support to win again. And let's go on because we're getting really close to the very end, and we're going to skip this one and go right on into USDA food program. And the USDA food program is administered by the Department of Health and Human Services. And it is those entitlement dollars for the purchase of domestic agricultural food products in schools and institutions. So it's kind of like your bank account that you have to purchase those items, and it's based on your number of meals you serve in the preceding year. It's based, I believe, in not last year, but in 1819, I believe, is the year they used to establish your entitlement dollars. And so once again, it's like a bank account that you use to purchase USDA foods. And it's somewhat like a use it or lose it account. And because that is administered by a different agency, we ask that you contact Chad Moore or Brian Gerkensmeyer. Those are the folks that work with that program. Particularly if you are new, you need to have that program explained to you. And those would be your contact individuals about USDA foods. So let's move on to the next slide. And everything starts with our nutrition services website. It has all the information that you need, and any topic that we have talked about today, you can find more information on our website. Now, the front page of the website, the home page, you can see that we not only administer the school meals program, but also the child and adult care food program, as well as the summer food service program. Just a reminder that we moved out of the state office building in April, and we continue to work remotely. We do have an office building, and that building is located at 84th and O Street, but we can go into the building, but we do not have offices in that building. And so continue to use our email and our phone numbers to contact us, and the most current information on how to contact us is on the homepage of the website. And we are so fortunate we have two new team members joining us in August. Lauren Christensen started on Monday of this week, and Jessica Fermowski, who's located in our North Platte office, will be starting with us on the 16th of August. And those individuals are program specialists, just like we are, that will be able to help you. And so that's exciting news for us. And so let's skip on down to the next slide. You will be getting, we're a little bit over 3:30, but we're going to say it's a 6-hour training today. And so you can complete that certificate, keep it on file. And for those of you that have hung out with us all day, thank you. And if you have any questions, now would be your opportunity to ask those questions. Please unmute yourself